So if you are watching this video, I'm guessing you somewhat know a thing or two about Mascot horror. This trend started in the 2010s with games like Slenderman the 8 Pages and Amnesia pioneering the genre, with the earlier games being acclaimed classics and delivering some of the scariest gaming experiences of all time. But after time, Mascot horror would become very redundant and games were being released just to make a quick buck. With how popular the genre got, it would make sense why this occurred. Even with all the highs and lows, Mascot horror is still one of the most popular horror genres. I think we can all say that Five Nights at Freddy's truly took this genre and elevated it to mainstream audiences. Games like Amnesia and Slenderman were popular, don't get me wrong, but FNAF truly took off like no other. A simple horror survival game which used a cast of characters to give the game more personality. Chica, Freddy, Foxy and Bonnie. These characters are the pinnacle of Mascot horror. The very concept of having multiple characters branded the new look for Mascot horror, with it traditionally usually revolving around one central character. With the sensational rise of Five Nights at Freddy's, the Mascot horror hype train began. The indie giant would dominate Mascot horror, with Scott Cawthon, the maker of the game, releasing many games in short succession. This helped continue the interest for the franchise, which in turn created even more excitement about this genre. YouTubers took this scene and dominated the landscape, with many videos on FNAF surpassing tens of millions of views. It was a domino effect, and as the views kept rising, so did the staggering amount of videos about the topic. In 2014, it was nearly impossible to avoid a video related to Five Nights at Freddy's. Whether it was MatPat discussing the lore or Markiplier's many screams, FNAF had permanently cemented a spot in Mascot horror classics. But soon we would start to see other attempts at this newly acclaimed concept. In 2017, the Mascot horror genre started to see new competition. Hello Neighbor is a goofy but frightening game about a crazy man. With this game, we saw our neighbor act very hostile, with the neighbor suspiciously hiding something in his basement. We, the player, had to find our way inside it, which revealed what seems to be a void. The idea of gradually reaching a goal would actually begin a new type of Mascot horror. This all culminated into Bendy and the Ink Machine, a new spin on Mascot horror which introduced chapters as opposed to sequels. Essentially, each installment had a short story, which lasted usually an hour, with some chapters, usually the early ones, barely lasting 20 minutes. Instead of having to make a whole new game, the duration of the game would be split and spread across multiple DLCs. This in turn meant developers could work less, but at the same time produce a lot of speculation in the community. It turned out this change would actually help Bendy and the Ink Machine become a phenomenon, and it seemed this wave of popular Mascot horror games just kept on coming. But there was just one thing. You see, before Mascot horror games were known to be some of the scariest games ever made. But now Mascot horror games were just your average horror experience, with a few forced scares chopped here and there. This era spanning 2018 to 2022 is the era of lost identity. Baldi's Basics being a massive hit, which depending on who you ask could be considered terrifying. But to the people who grew up with Mascot horror, it became more and more apparent that games started to feel less scary. Do note this can just be because us long-term Mascot horror fans have become so used to the scares these games often have, that it simply doesn't scare us anymore. But the thing is, it all of a sudden started to be that kids mainly consumed Mascot horror media. Personally, I grew up during the boom of Mascot horror, so it maybe was just history repeating itself. And so Mascot horror slowly started to lose its toll on horror. Remember the game which started the whole Mascot horror thing? Well, with 2021 coming to an end, Security Breach would be released, and it changed everything. Security Breach is by no means terrible, but one thing that is certain is the game was not scary. The game was just It felt like it was made for kids, and to compare, the first FNAF game was a serious attempt at horror. It just so happened that kids really found the game scary and interesting, which is how the franchise grew to what it is today. But this was different. It seemed the key to making an insanely popular Mascot horror game is to make a chapter-based horror game with cheap scares here and there. Soon came Poppy Playtime, and the game would borrow the Bendy and the Ink Machine chapter-based system. It certainly became an instant hit, with more chapters being promised to be released. But on the YouTube homepage, it started to get bombarded with videos related to the game, but had a key target audience: kids. With 3 AM videos and other kid animations, the game became more and more stripped of its horror. Which brings us to the last game I will talk about in this video, Garden of Banban. This game is the ultimate culmination of everything Mascot horror has been leading up to. The game being primarily a kid game, with it nowhere near being actually scary. For long-term Mascot horror fans, it came as a joke, and people were playing it to see what the hype was all about. Eventually, after multiple chapters, the game received a lot of exposure, and this all continued the spiraling nature of Mascot horror. What once housed absolute horror classics has become simple kid games with not much actual horror present in the games. Was this to be expected? Mascot horror had always somehow been appealing to kids. The Mascot side, which kids will obviously be more interested in, as well kids like mascots. It's why Disneyland has mascots, and also Chuck E. Cheese, and all these places are for kids. So now simply the genre has subverted and has become more made for kids. However, with a large chunk of this audience being the ones who grew up with the earlier games, the Mascot horror genre would start to change and incorporate more attempts at becoming scary. 2023 was the next pivot in Mascot horror. FNAF rebranded its game and made it more scary, with it prioritizing scares as a core focus of the gameplay in the Rune DLC. Poppy Playtime would receive a new chapter, which has all in all been a major step up in quality from the last 2 chapters. In fact, chapter 3 is very reminiscent of what Mascot horror used to be, with the game fully taking advantage of the creepy aesthetic the first 2 chapters kind of laid out. Even to be released games like Zoochosis being incredibly gory. This is a body cam survival game, which is something the Mascot horror scene hasn't seen before. Even FNAF, after releasing the acclaimed Help Wanted 2, which was a massive step in the right direction for what FNAF should feel like, also in the same year, FNAF even made a theatrical release, which has left audiences wanting more, and even 6 times its original budget. Another FNAF game, Into the Pit, has been shown to actually be scary. The art style and the aesthetic the game pulls off actually has people excited for the release. I mean, heck, the new Poppy Playtime literally has me theorizing about the game, which I honestly thought would never happen, but here we are. It seems the genre is going through another defining period, which seems to be pleasing not only long-term Mascot horror fans, but even the newer ones. However, will this last? Well, only time will tell. But anyways, that's it for this video. If you guys have enjoyed them, please smash a like. And if you are new around here and do enjoy the content, then subscribe as well. And until next time, take it easy and goodbye.